Darren James hadn't worn jeans in over a year, but today he was doing everything he could to look like, well, not himself. He parked his black Range Rover 2 blocks from the house, tossed his Rolex in the glove compartment, and pulled on a faded baseball cap before heading toward the backyard of his college buddy's place. The smell of grilled meat and beer hit him before he even reached the gate, and he sighed in relief. Normal. Casual. No one here would care that he owned a luxury tech firm or that Forbes listed him as one of the country's youngest millionaires under 35. That was the entire point. "Darren," his friend Luke called out, waving from the grill with a spatula in hand. "You made it, man. Burgers or ribs?" "I'm easy," Darren said, shoulders relaxing. He scanned the crowd. Lawn chairs were scattered in the grass, string lights hung from the trees, and people were laughing, drinking out of red cups. No suits, no investors, no fake smiles. And then he saw her. She was standing near the cooler, pulling out a soda, wearing a yellow sundress and Converse sneakers, her dark hair piled in a messy bun. She was laughing at something someone said, but even from across the yard, Darren could tell she wasn't just being polite, her laugh was real. It hit him in the chest. "Who's that?" Darren asked, nodding toward her. Luke glanced over. "Oh, that's Vanessa. She's my wife's cousin, just moved back into town. Be nice, she's had a rough year." Darren didn't ask for details, he didn't need them. His legs were already moving. Vanessa didn't notice him approach until he was right in front of her. "Hey," he said, offering a smile that he hoped looked nothing like the one he used in boardrooms. Her eyes flicked up to his. "Hi. I'm Darren," he said, holding out his hand. "Vanessa," she said, shaking it. Her grip was warm, confident. "You with Luke's crew?" "Yeah, college buddies," he said. "You, family, my cousin is married to the guy who thinks he's a grill god." Darren laughed. "He takes it seriously, huh? He threatened to kick me out for putting ketchup on my hot dog." "You monster," Vanessa grinned. "Exactly." They stood there for a beat. Her eyes were a rich brown, her voice low and steady. She didn't seem impressed by him or curious or even flirty. She was just present, comfortable in her own skin. It was oddly disarming. "Want a drink?" Darren asked. "I already have one," she said, holding up her soda. "But I'll come with you." Watching people fight over the last cold beer is entertainment. They moved toward the cooler, and their conversation slipped into something easy. He found out she'd just moved back from Seattle after quitting her job in publishing. That she was living in her aunt's guest house while figuring things out. That she hated small talk and loved thunderstorms, and she didn't ask what he did for work. He didn't offer. Later, when they were sitting on the grass away from the noise, she glanced at him and said, "You don't talk like the other guys here." "What does that mean?" "You're listening," she said. "Most guys can't get through a sentence without trying to sound impressive." "I'm not trying to be impressive." "Good." She looked straight at him. "Because I'm really good at spotting fake." Something in his chest tightened. "I'm not fake," he said quietly. She studied him for a second. Then nodded. "I believe you." The backyard was glowing under the lights. A dog barked in the distance. Someone turned on music and people started dancing on the deck. Darren hadn't felt this calm in months. "I needed this," he admitted. "This?" she asked. "Just regular people, no suits. No politics, no games." Vanessa tilted her head. "You sound like you've been playing in a different league." He opened his mouth, closed it, then just said something like that. She didn't push, and for the first time in a long time, Darren didn't feel the need to perform. He just sat with her, talking about childhood memories, favorite road trip snacks, and what she'd do if she won the lottery. "I'd open a bookstore," she said. "With a coffee shop inside, no Wi-Fi, phones off, just books and people talking." "That's oddly specific." "I've had a lot of time to think," she said, smiling softly. "Can I tell you something?" Darren asked. "Sure. I don't usually talk this much, not about real stuff." Vanessa looked at him. "Well, I don't usually like talking to strangers, so we're even," he laughed. When the night wound down and people started leaving, Darren found himself lingering. He didn't want to go back to his world just yet. "I should probably head out," she said, glancing toward the house. Yeah, he said, standing with her. Me too. They walked to the front. Her car was parked across the street. He hesitated. Can I see you again? He asked. Vanessa looked at him for a long second. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a napkin. She scribbled something and handed it to him, her number. But no texting. Call. Like a normal person, Darren grinned. Deal. He watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing down the street. Then he looked down at the napkin in his hand. He'd gone to a barbecue to get away from his life. He didn't expect to meet someone who made him want to rewrite it. And he definitely didn't expect her. The first time Darren called Vanessa, she didn't answer. He stared at his phone, thumb hovering over the screen, then tossed it on the passenger seat beside him. The sun had already dipped below the skyline, casting long gold streaks over the city. Traffic inched forward, but he hardly noticed. He'd built entire systems to streamline global logistics, but dialing a woman's number had him second-guessing reality. On the third ring, his phone lit up. You actually called, Vanessa said, her voice calm but edged with amusement. I said I would. I figured you'd be the type to forget. That's fair, he said, but I'm not. He heard her shift, maybe settling into a chair. So what's the plan? I was thinking coffee, no Wi-Fi, phones off. Just people talking. There was a pause then. That's dangerously close to clever. Is that a yes? It's a text me the address, but pretend you didn't. I'll pretend very convincingly. They met the next evening. He didn't take her to some hidden 5-star rooftop lounge or exclusive speakeasy. He found a hole in the wall cafe near the edge of downtown, one with uneven floorboards and a chalkboard menu that looked like it hadn't been updated in years. The barista had a sleeve of tattoos and didn't bother asking for names. Vanessa was already seated by the window when he arrived. You're late, she said without looking up. I'm exactly on time. Late people always say that. You looked like someone who prefers to arrive early. Vanessa glanced at him. So you're observant, only when it matters. She shut her book and slid it into her bag. This place smells like burnt toast. Perfect, isn't it? She didn't answer, but the corners of her mouth twitched. They sat for a while, slowly peeling back layers. Darren talked about growing up on the East Side, how his mother ran a tiny accounting firm out of their cramped townhouse, and how he used to code late at night when the city was asleep. Vanessa told him about her old apartment in Seattle where the ceiling leaked and the neighbors argued through the walls, and how silence had become her favorite sound. You ever miss it? He asked. The noise, sometimes the chaos, not at all. I know what you mean. I doubt you do, she said. You don't seem like someone who's ever had to share a bathroom with 4 roommates and a raccoon problem. I didn't say I missed that, he said, but I get wanting to start over. Vanessa's gaze lingered on him. You're hiding something. Everyone is, but you especially. He didn't flinch. Why do you think that? Because you speak like someone who's always calculating the safest version of the truth. He leaned back. And that bothers you? No, she said. It intrigues me. They left the cafe when the streetlights buzzed on. She didn't invite him to walk her home, and he didn't offer. They stood outside, caught in the hush between passing cars. I'm not going to ask what you do, she said. I wouldn't tell you anyway. Good, I like this better. This version of you. Whoever he is. When she turned to leave, Darren stayed rooted to the sidewalk long after her footsteps faded. He didn't return to his penthouse that night. Instead, he drove to a quiet overlook above the city and sat with the engine off, watching the skyline flicker like static. The silence pressed in, and for once, he let it. There was something about Vanessa that disarmed him, not because she challenged him, but because she didn't care who he was. The next time he saw her, it was raining. He had just stepped out of a meeting when she called unexpected, direct. Are you doing anything important? I'm standing in a lobby full of executives pretending to know what quarterly synergy means. So no, then. He laughed and stepped outside, letting the rain hit his face. What's up? Come meet me. Where? You'll figure it out. She hung up. 15 minutes later, Darren pulled up in front of a stark brick building with a flickering sign that read Fulton Rec Center. He found her inside, standing under fluorescent lights with a basketball in her hands. "You play?" she asked, tossing him the ball. "I haven't since high school," he said, catching it. "Even better, less pressure." He raised an eyebrow. "You dragged me out here to humiliate me." "No, I dragged you out here because I needed a break and figured you did too." They played one-on-one for almost an hour. He was terrible. She was relentless. They laughed more than they scored. When they finally collapsed onto the bleachers, breathless and soaked, he glanced at her. "You do this with everyone?" "No," she said. Most men would have panicked at the lack of air conditioning. "Am I passing your test so far?" "I haven't decided yet." He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "What happens if I fail, you disappear, and I pretend none of this happened?" "And if I pass?" Vanessa looked at him, long and steady. "Then maybe I let you stick around." She stood, brushing dust from her jeans, then walked toward the exit without waiting for him to follow. He did anyway. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy. She didn't say goodbye. She just nodded and slipped into her car. Darren stood alone, soaked through, grinning like a man who had just lost every game but somehow still won. He didn't know what this was becoming, but he knew one thing. He didn't want to disappear. Darren sat in a conference room surrounded by glass walls, but all he could hear was her voice. He wasn't supposed to be thinking about Vanessa. Not during a pitch meeting with international investors. Not while his CFO laid out quarterly returns with bar graphs and projected trends. But his mind kept drifting to the way she'd rolled her eyes when he missed that final free throw, how she'd tossed him a towel like he was a kid at summer camp, not a man used to commanding boardrooms. He blinked as the room quieted. "Mr. James," one of the investors asked, her accent crisp. "Do you have any final thoughts before we proceed?" Darren sat forward. "Let's move forward with the capital injection but hold back on the Shenzhen expansion. I want the next phase of development built here, locally." There was a beat of silence. His CFO looked like someone had just changed his slides mid-presentation. "Very well," the investor said after a pause. "We'll revise accordingly." When the meeting ended, Darren walked out without another word. He didn't wait for the usual flurry of questions. He didn't check his phone. He just headed down to the underground garage where his driver opened the car door without a glance. "Take me to the west side," he said. The street she lived on was lined with narrow trees and uneven sidewalks. Her aunt's house had peeling paint and a porch swing that creaked when the wind hit it. He hadn't been there before, not officially. But she'd mentioned the neighborhood once and he'd remembered. She was on the porch when he arrived, a book in her lap and a pair of reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up, surprised. "That's not your usual timing," she said. "I was in the area. You were never in this area. Now I am." She closed the book and stood. "You hungry?" "I could be." "You like Ethiopian?" He raised an eyebrow. "There's a spot a few blocks down, no menus." "They bring what they want." "That sounds slightly dangerous." "It's perfect." They walked. She didn't ask why he showed up uninvited. He didn't offer a reason. Instead, they talked about a podcast she liked, how she'd accidentally agreed to help her aunt repaint the entire living room over the weekend, and how she once got lost in Montreal and ended up at a wedding she wasn't invited to. At the restaurant, they sat on low stools and shared platters with their hands. The food was spicy, unfamiliar, and strangely comforting. "You're quiet tonight," she said, tearing a piece of flatbread. "I made a decision today," he said. "Important, big." She waited. "I shifted a major part of my company's expansion plan. It'll take longer, cost more, and upset a few people." "Why?" "Because I realized I don't want to just grow, I want to build something that matters, and I think I forgot that for a while." Vanessa wiped her fingers on a napkin. "That's either a midlife crisis or a breakthrough. I'm not entirely sure which." They left the restaurant just as the streetlights flickered on. The air smelled like rain, but the sky held steady. "Come on," she said, tugging his sleeve. "There's a record store around the corner. It closes late." Inside, it smelled like old cardboard and dust. Jazz played from a battered speaker behind the counter. She wandered the aisles like she knew exactly where she was going. He followed, watching the way she moved, how her fingers hovered over the spines like she was reading stories in them. She pulled out a faded album with a cracked cover. "This one," she said, holding it up. "You ever heard of them?" He shook his head. "Perfect," she said. "Then it'll be yours." She handed it to the man at the counter, who rang it up without a word. Darren reached for his wallet, but she stopped him. "My treat," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not used to that." "Good, maybe you'll learn." They walked back in silence. When they reached the porch, she leaned against the railing. "You're not what I expected," she said. "I'm not sure I am either. You're used to people wanting something from you." "Yes, I don't. I know." Vanessa studied him for a long moment. "That's probably why you keep showing up." "I keep showing up because I'm starting to care." Her expression didn't shift, but something in her eyes softened. "I don't do casual," she said finally. "I don't want casual. I've been burned before. I'm not here to burn you." She looked away. "You say that like it's a promise." "It is," she didn't reply, just stepped forward and reached for the album in his hand. "Put this somewhere safe," she said. "I want it back if you vanish." "I'm not going anywhere," she nodded. "We'll see." He walked away without trying to kiss her. There was a gravity between them now, something heavier than charm or flirtation. She wasn't just another woman who'd be impressed by his car or credentials. She was someone who made him question why he'd ever let those things define him. Back in his penthouse, he set the record on the table, still wrapped in its brown paper sleeve. He didn't open it. Not yet. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to tell her the truth. Vanessa opened the door barefoot, paint in her hair and a roller still in one hand. "You're early," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "I brought backup," Darren said, holding up a brown paper bag. She sniffed. "Is that Thai?" "2 orders of green curry, 1 pad CU, and something I couldn't pronounce." She set the roller down on a tarp and looked at him. "That's excessive." "You're welcome." He followed her through the hallway, past a half-finished wall and a stack of drop cloths. The living room smelled like fresh paint and lemongrass. Her aunt wasn't home, and the silence felt almost intimate. "I take back everything I said about you being useless with a brush," he added, surveying the clean lines along the trim. "You doubted me. You doubted me last time." She handed him a towel. "You can repay me by finishing the last coat." He set the food down on a side table and took the roller from her. She watched from the couch as he worked, legs tucked beneath her, hair damp from a shower she clearly hadn't had time to finish drying. "Why did you really come today?" she asked, voice quiet. "Because I'm done hiding." She didn't respond, but a flicker of something crossed her face, wary but not closed off. "I should have told you sooner," Darren said, setting the roller back on the tray. "I run a company that designs secure AI systems for financial institutions. We handle private contracts, government-level encryption. It's big, bigger than I ever expected." Vanessa's expression didn't waver. "I'm not surprised," she said finally. "No, you're careful with your words. You watch everything before you act. That doesn't come from coasting. I didn't know how to tell you without ruining this. You think I care about your money?" "No," he said. "That's why it scared me." She stood then, walked to the window, arms crossed. "I've dated men with ambition," she said. "But they always wanted me to orbit their lives. You didn't. You let me stay grounded." He stepped closer. "Because I didn't want you to disappear." She turned around. "So why tell me now?" "Because I want more than fragments of you. And you deserve more than fragments of me." Vanessa didn't speak for a long moment. Then she walked to the side table, opened the bag, and handed him a container. "I'm not going to fall apart over a confession," she said. "I wouldn't blame you if you did. I've had worse surprises." Darren took the food, sat beside her, and they ate in silence for a few minutes. The room felt warmer than before. "You know what's funny?" she said eventually. "I used to think I needed someone who could fix everything. Pay off the bills, solve the problems, make life clean. And now, I want someone who doesn't panic when it's messy." He reached for her hand. "I don't panic." She laced her fingers through his. "We'll see." Later that week, he asked her to meet him on the rooftop of a building she'd never been to. When she arrived, she found strings of soft white lights, a linen-covered table set for two, and a view that stretched across the entire city. "You did all this?" she asked, stepping onto the rooftop. "I made a few calls," Darren said, pulling out her chair. Vanessa looked around, brow raised. "Trying to impress me now?" "No," he said. "I want you to see the world I live in. Because I want you in it." They ate, and for once, he let her ask questions. She learned about the company he'd built from scratch, the pressure of investors, the boardroom betrayals, the late nights he spent staring at code and questioning if any of it meant anything. He told her about the offer to sell, the one he turned down despite the obscene number attached to it. "Why didn't you take it?" she asked. "Because I still had something to prove." "To who?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "To myself." They were quiet after that. When dessert came, a white chocolate mousse she'd once mentioned, liking, she stared at it, then at him. "You listen too closely. You say that like it's a flaw." She leaned across the table. "It's not." The next morning, she woke to find a small envelope taped to her front door. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note. "There's a gallery opening tonight. Wear something you love. I'll be waiting at 7. No name, no address, but she knew. When she arrived that evening, wearing a deep navy dress she hadn't touched in 2 years, the car that picked her up didn't stop at a gallery. It pulled into a private entrance at the base of a high rise, where a doorman greeted her by name and led her to the elevator. At the top floor, the doors opened to a space washed in gold light, floor-to-ceiling windows, candles flickering along the walls, soft music playing from a live quartet on a makeshift stage. Darren stood at the center of it all, wearing a tailored black suit, no tie. "You lied," she said, stepping out. "I did. This isn't a gallery." He walked toward her. "No, it's my home." Vanessa looked around, the luxury unmistakable now, the art, the view, the silence of a place too high above the city to hear it breathe. "You brought me here, why?" "Because I'm not hiding anymore." She met his eyes. "Then why does this feel like a goodbye?" "It's not." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "This isn't a proposal," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate gold bracelet. "It's a promise." Vanessa stared at it. "I want to build something real," Darren said. "With you, not because it's convenient, not because I'm tired of being alone, but because you make me want to stop chasing and start choosing." She took the bracelet, fingers brushing his. "You're still terrible at basketball." "I'll practice. And I'm not moving into a penthouse. I'll come to you." She smiled, slipping the bracelet onto her wrist. "Then I guess we have a deal." They stood together as the music swelled, the city glittering around them. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt like they were pretending. Darren stood at the edge of the terrace garden behind his estate in the Catskills, surrounded by towering pines and the soft hush of wind brushing through the trees. He watched as Vanessa crouched beside a raised flower bed, her hands deep in the soil, planting something with gentle, precise movements. She was glowing in the late afternoon light, sleeves rolled up, a streak of dirt along her cheek. "I don't think that's how you're supposed to do it," he said, stepping onto the stone path behind her. "Yes, it is," she replied without looking up. "You're just used to things that come pre-assembled." He crouched beside her. "That's not fair. I built an empire from scratch." She glanced at him. "And yet you still can't tell the difference between basil and mint." "I never claimed to be perfect." She handed him a tiny green shoot. "Try again, gently." He tucked it into the soil, mimicking her technique. "How am I doing?" She wiped her hands on her jeans. "Better." "You didn't crush it this time." They both sat back, hands dirty, knees touching. The quiet around them wasn't the kind that needed filling. It pulsed with something deeper, a comfort that had woven itself in slowly, without either of them noticing until it was already rooted. "I signed the offer this morning," Darren said, brushing soil from his palms. Vanessa turned her head. "The acquisition," he nodded. 32% stake retained. I keep creative control. They take operations global." She studied his face. "Was that hard?" "Harder than I thought it'd be." But I don't want to spend the next 10 years chasing quarterly wins. I want time, I want this. Vanessa reached down and smoothed the soil around the last plant. You're changing, I'm choosing. She leaned her head on his shoulder. So what now? He turned his face toward her hair, breathing in the scent of lavender and earth. We build something, from the ground up, together. A week later they stood beneath a white tent overlooking the Hudson River. Not a wedding, not yet, just a gathering. The people closest to them, Luke and his wife, Darren's mother, Vanessa's aunt, mingled over wine and soft music. The air was filled with the scent of jasmine and the low hum of string instruments. Vanessa approached Darren from behind and slipped her arms around his waist. "My cousin thinks you're secretly royalty," she whispered. "I'll take that as a compliment. She also thinks we're getting married next month." He turned toward her, resting his hands on her waist. "Are we?" She looked up at him, eyes steady. "Only if we do it barefoot in a bookstore," he grinned. "Done." Later that night, after everyone had gone, Darren led her up to the rooftop of the estate. The sky was clear, stars scattered like spilled sugar across the velvet dark. A telescope stood beside a pair of loungers, and a silver tray held 2 glasses of wine and a stack of old poetry books. "I found this one in a used shop downtown," he said, handing her a worn copy of Neruda. She flipped through the pages until she found a dog-eared one. "You've been reading it." "More than I expected to." She sank into the lounger beside him. "I used to think love was something that either broke you or saved you. And now," she looked over at him, "now I think it's something you build, quietly." Without even realizing it, he reached over and laced their fingers together. "Then let's keep building." A few months later, they moved into a renovated brownstone in Brooklyn. Vanessa opened her bookstore on the first-floor, brick walls, arched windows, shelves that reached the ceiling. No Wi-Fi, just like she'd dreamed. A bell above the door rang when regulars came in. Darren installed a coffee counter in the back, despite her protests. "You're trying to turn this into a cafe," she accused one morning, eyeing the espresso machine. "I'm trying to keep you from skipping lunch." She narrowed her eyes. "You bribed my suppliers, didn't you? Maybe. You're impossible, but you love me." She kissed him over the counter. "Unfortunately." In the evenings, they sat on the rooftop of their brownstone, legs tangled, reading aloud from whatever book she'd brought home. He worked less, traveled rarely. And when he did, she often came with him, curling beside him on private flights, editing manuscripts or sketching out ideas for book clubs. One night, under a sky thick with summer heat and fireflies, Darren stood in the backyard with a small velvet box in his hand. No crowd, no cameras, just her. Barefoot, laughing at something her aunt had said earlier that day, he dropped to one knee. Vanessa's breath hitched. "This time it is a proposal." She stared at him, mouth parted. "I want the bookstore, the garden, the late-night arguments about punctuation. I want a life that smells like old books and fresh basil, with you." She dropped to her knees and kissed him before he could open the box. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she whispered. Their wedding was held in the bookstore. Aisles cleared, chairs tucked between poetry shelves. They read vows in front of a stained glass window that caught the morning sun just right. Luke officiated. Her aunt cried. His mother danced too much. And when it was over, when every tear had been wiped and every laugh had echoed into the rafters, Darren pulled her into the middle of the store and kissed her like the world had finally landed in the right place. Years passed. They never stopped building. Not empires anymore, but memories. Traditions. A life filled with messy mornings, mismatched socks, and the kind of love that didn't need declarations to be understood. In the end, Darren never missed the boardrooms, not once. Because every time he walked through the door of their brownstone and heard the faint hum of jazz from the old record player, every time he saw her curled in a chair with a book in her lap and a mug of tea in her hand, he knew he had everything he'd ever been chasing. And this time, he wasn't letting it go.